Hi, friends. I'm Gary Wockner, host of Overcoming Overshoot here on EarthX TV. The title of our show today is Does Polarization and Partisanship Help Save America's Environment? On this show, we try to have some of the hard conversations that the environmental movement doesn't always prefer to talk about. And today, we're going to jump right into the belly of the beast, so hang on tight. Today's discussion will include the topics of African American history, population growth, immigration, the Sierra Club, and Black Lives Matter. And we have one of the leading experts in the world on those topics, Dr. Frank Morris. I guarantee you that if you thought you knew everything about these topics after this show is over, you might be thinking something different. Frank Morris was born in 1939 and he has lived it. Frank's resume is very long, but I'll just hit a few high spots. He had a decorated career in the U.S. Foreign Service, served as Chief of Policy Planning and Analysis for the Federal War on Poverty, was director of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and then held various high-ranking roles in university administration. Frank received awards and honors from civil rights organizations in Maryland, Illinois, and Washington State. In addition, Frank ran for the board of directors of the Sierra Club in 2004, and he is a founder of Progressives for Immigration Reform. Welcome to the show, Frank.
Thank you, Gary. Glad to be here.
Before we kind of get into the meat, I want to do just a little bit of kind of a biographical question, because I also grew up in Illinois, sort of central Illinois. And, in the 40s and 50s, Cairo, Illinois, where you were born, it wasn't exactly the South, but it was pretty darn close to the South. And I just sort of wonder, what about your upbringing sort of caused you to move the direction you did, which was somewhat unconventional for, an African-American man in the 40s and 50s?
Well, Carol, you're being generous. It was bad news. It was a sort of like a southern, really part of Illinois. Plant activity was strong. I was sort of born in Carroll by accident. My mother never married my dad, and she was sent out there to sort of have me. And so for the first 6 years of my life, I was raised in not just in Carroll, but in St. Louis and in Carbondale by people who were not related to me. And then at 6 years old, I moved back to my paternal grandparents and my aunt in Boston, who raised me from there. But briefly, it's been tough if you were African American to not to be overwhelmed by the power in the 40s and the 50s of the culture and the culture of the oppression of both segregation, etc. I remember traveling cross country with my dad and seeing a proud man have to ask in places like Illinois and in Nebraska, could a colored man eat here, or could you go to for a hotel? This is outside of the South now, and in sundown towns in the Midwest, etc. Things which folks have no idea are happening now. Matter of fact, my grandchildren live in Edina, Minnesota, one of the prosperous suburbs of Minnesota. They didn't know it was a sundown town back in those early days. So it's growing up in Boston, which was supposedly an enlightened place, civil rights, hub of the abolitionist movements. But I found out even in Boston, and growing up in Roxbury, you better not show up after dark in some of the parts of the city that were not African American, that were in South Boston or East Boston or Charlestown or Jamaica Plain. So this has been with us so constantly, and so even when I went away to college, I got a big scholarship at the Colgate, and in the late 50s, in classes talking about the bad segregation of the South, of how bad it was, the overt segregation. I said, well, wait a minute, look, I come from Boston, and I better not show up in parts of the town after it either. So it's just been one of the things we'll get into later is how much of this real history of the U.S. that that really is impact on it, that still continues to impact on us. It's just really not recognized, and because of that, um, the susceptibility and the vulnerability to American people to disinformation and and lies or the rejection of truth about environmental and population issues is so strong because it's never been challenged. It over time, the story of our culture that was not questioned, that was wrong, has led Americans to believe that there's no cost. There's no cost to accepting lies, whether they're about Confederates, whether they're about traders, whether they're about savage Indians, and so forth and so forth.
And it's a perfect segue because we want to talk a little bit about the polarization and the partisanship that we're seeing. I think people who are maybe younger might think it's the worst in history, but you've been around a lot longer. So I wonder how it's kind of changed over your life. The polarization and the partisanship we're seeing in the public sphere and also around not just civil rights issues, but also environmental issues.
Well, it's sad that we Americans, or that the way history has been taught, has been so rote or about dates or times, and not about flow and processes that we still have the effects of. It was before my time. Not only were things bad before, it was much worse before the time of my own time. My great grandfather was a slave. Slavery was not that far. I mean, I might be in my early 80s now, but my great grandfather was born into slavery. And he lived under slavery. So we're not really that far. I mean, I have great grandchildren, but my great grandfather didn't live as long as I've lived. But so the period of time that we don't talk about was when my relatives, my dad, or the most intelligent man that I ever knew, my grandfather, was in Alabama and a boon man or a labor dock worker in Mobile, and then later a law person. But he was brilliant. He and his boon men, under segregation, because the state would not provide schools for Black kids beyond the 6th grade. So they built their own school and petitioned to the government and got the teacher. They provided the teacher, which was the first in Alabama. Had an uncle who went to a missionary school that was later burned down. So I'm simply saying that there are costs. There are costs that we still are paying for not knowing. And history was much, much worse then. Great books such as Blackman's book, Slavery by Another Name, really point out that some of the worst times for African Americans were not just during slavery, which they were, but afterward, after the 1877 compromise, where white folks in the North got tired of fighting the battle for maybe Blacks in the South and wanted to unite with their white brothers in the Southern Democratic Party, and they wrote off the effectiveness of not the 13th but the 14th and 15th Amendments, which were supposed to guarantee voting rights for Black males, which of course it didn't under terrorism. So these periods of time, and in the time after slavery, when there was not a 40 acres and a mule, but and folks were left to fend for themselves, and when the power of the state would put people in jail, African Americans in jail if they couldn't show a job, and then the jails in Alabama would contract them out. Blackman's book points out that in 1893, 1/4 of the revenue from the state of Alabama came from contracting out Black laborers to mines where many of them died, and to steel mills, the early parts of U.S. Steel in Alabama. These are and the lynchings, the American terrorism. After the thousands of folks who were, and it wasn't just Black folks. They were Jewish people. They were sometimes Catholics, but the overwhelming majority were Blacks. Were terrorism, especially about voting. So it's these times which are much, much, much more difficult and worse than what we're under now. But American children are not taught that. They're not taught this. So they don't know that our greatest achievements have not been because we are so different, we were so enlightened, that we were such a great country, but it's been the struggles that we were not, that our founders, who were basically, mostly, not all of them, but slave owning, who did not believe in democracy. That's why we have a republic. But basically, slave owning folks that put the document into the Constitution. That our great struggles, not as the originalists say, but the fact that we've changed, that we have been able to evolve, the struggles that make us so much better than what we were. That history has not been told, and so therefore, it's a comfort history of lies for some people that we live with, and we're paying the cost of that today in environmental movement and in the climate movement and in the justice movement.
And when you say we're paying the cost of that, I mean, flesh that out just a little bit more. I mean,
one of the things that if folks don't know our history, one of the reasons we have polarization is that many in the Republican Party believe in limited government. They believe that their status in America has been because of excessive individualism and sturdy individual against that made a country out of the savages from the indigenous people to out to the West, where indigenous pioneers with no help from anybody was able to carve out a life of rugged individualism. When in reality, it was collective efforts from the protection that was served by the Army to subsidize railroad fortunes that brought in many kinds of things, to sometimes positive relations with Native Americans that saved the Winthrop colony from starving, and so forth, to the fact that the West was made because white folks could get from the Homestead Act of 1862 160 acres by claiming. Black folks were not. Black folks, some black towns evolved, but not through the Homestead Act, because blacks, like for not only the Homestead Act, but later on into the New Deal, were excluded from the kinds of federal benefits that many take for granted. Even after even those who served in World War II, if you served from the South and you came back and fought for a country, came back with GI benefits, because the Roosevelt had felt he had to have the Southern support for the New Deal, he granted local autonomy in the administration of that. So that meant that Black folks were left out, and even Social Security, because in 1935, when it was first proposed, it covered everybody except two categories of workers: agricultural workers and domestic workers, which of course at that time were disproportionately Black. So the fact is that this history, if you don't know it, and if you are strongly polarized based on ignorance, or based on values that it might not be ignorance, you just might prefer those values. I mean, if I would prefer the value to believe that I'm unlike the other, because that there are things that I can contribute to, that I do, that or my parents did, not because of systemic benefits which we may have received and the other have. Because if I can show that it's individualist effort and work, and the others are not where I am because of individual problems or individual failures, then I have no responsibility to any kind of systemic things to deal with any kind of failures, because that's not my reality. And I feel better, so I'm going to fight for that. And that's a strong basis of polarization.
One of the topics that you have chosen to speak out about over the last 20 years is certainly one of the more polarizing and complex topics in American history, and that is the federal government's immigration system. and our immigration policies. And you've taken some fairly strong opinions. You've written about it quite a few times. And of course, you helped start an organization called Progressives for Immigration Reform. And I think, and I know this story, and I know that I've heard you say it before. And I want you to sort of tell us why, so that others can hear it. Why a man such as yourself, who's deeply rooted in African American scholarship and history, has the opinion that you do about the policies of America's immigration system.
Well, once again, folks don't know the history. If you know and this really is surprising to many young Black folks today. They have no idea about how that I'm on the side of not only Black scholars but Black activists about concerns about high American immigration, because African Americans have always been the last hired and the first fired. And if there was any alternative, especially white alternative or non-Black alternative to African Americans, then this was the preferred labor route. After slavery, slavery was preferred first, but after that, and if you couldn't get contract labor or sharecropping, then you really did not want to value hiring in African Americans for whatever reason. So African American historical figures have been where I am on this. Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, W.B.B. Du Bois, A. Philip Randolph, a labor person, Marcus Garvey. That's where I am, and the young people have no idea that and it isn't because Black folks have not been sympathetic to immigrants. America has been sympathetic to immigrants, and more sympathetic to immigrants than they have to our own. Immigrant opportunities were opening up in labor unions, in the white unions, the skilled unions, the guilds, then the AFL, and then later the CIA, and these were open to immigrants that always were resistant Black folks, and so therefore, we still feel the effects of that. That's part of the reason of the 10 times differential between Black and white wealth. And as Katzenbach's book, when affirmative action was white, it was not called affirmative action when Blacks were excluded for more than 100 or almost 200 years. And so therefore, folks have no idea that you've had white affirmative action through racial discrimination that continues. But you don't have it for Black. But the point is that this distortion of reality. Someone said that, and it's sad about polarization, but I think it's relevant polarization, that sometimes truth has a liberal bias. And I think that this is one of the kinds of things that conservatives and their holding believe that is either something's or a matter of opinion, such as i.e. the cultural adaptation acceptance of the lost cause theory, from Gone with the Wind and Birth of a Nation, right on, right down to contemporary names of Confederate or who were racist traitors of forts, where some of my mentees, Black mentees that I sent to West Point, have to go to these Confederate fort named places named after traitors here in 2020. I mean, outrageous if you're Black, if you knew what William Bedford Forrest did to black soldiers, or A.P. Hill or Benning. So so all I'm simply saying is that this history is just so fundamental, and it's been misrepresented, and it's a tremendous cost, not just to Black folks, but the cost of not really facing truth until now. If we come to the more positive things at the end, is the fact that we are facing it now. For me, that is a great positive thing, that some of us are being forced to have the opportunity to bring the reality. And the scholars that are doing, historical scholars are really doing a great job. There's some really tremendous historical scholarship that's coming out now that was either suppressed or just simply wasn't valued in the past.
And one person you didn't mention was more recent. That's Barbara Jordan, right? And Barbara was
Of
she was a
course.
congresswoman from Texas, right? And she was
A matter of fact, one of the things I'm really proud of is that while I was a dean at Morgan State, which is the largest historical Black university in Maryland, we gave Barbara before she died an honorary degree, and I put the as a graduate dean put the hood over her. So that's one of the, and she was magnificent in speaking. But that's absolutely right. See, and many young Black folks are not aware of that history, are not aware of where Barbara, and she just simply said a simple fundamentally part about immigration. We should let those who should come in, and those who should not be here should not come in or should leave. A simple fundamental fact of American law, or it should be of American law and American practice, but it has not been. And what's really worse is the fact that American policies, especially policies, one of my, I'm a former retired senior foreign service officer in economic development for 8, decorated matter of fact, but one of the real tragic facts is that a lot of our immigration policy has been driven by bad U.S. policies, bad U.S. trade policies, of where we dump our subsidized corn on Mexico, and poor Mexican peasant farmers are driven off the land because they can't subside, or are subsidized. It's always subsidized. It's not corporate welfare when it goes to powerful agricultural actors. So our corporate welfare sugar beet subsidies, and our corporate welfare sugar cane subsidies in places like Louisiana, where we have a world surplus of sugar market, but those subsidized markets are thrown on the world market. It drives further economic prices down, and economic migrants, or our cotton subsidies, cotton welfare going to big growers that affects African cotton producers and around the world. So it's the fact these are never discussed. Both the fact that both parties are really donor driven, and a good book by Givens in political science, Affluence and Influence, points out that for both major parties, there may be polarization, but it's not polarization on this. Both major parties are more responsive to their donors than they are to their voters. And this is the kind of thing that we must address. I wonder if we can ever address any of the social justice, the environmental, or the population, or the battle for the commons, until we can recognize that our constitutional amendment is needed that says that money is not speech, and that corporations are not people. Things that Supreme Court interpretation have put in the law that were never, that the founders, the original founders, would never have dreamed of.
And just to tie a few of these things together, I'm aware from a number of things you've written that you support restricting immigration into the United States, especially for low wage jobs and that kind of thing. And there's a number of reasons for that. It's because of the America's economic policies and trade policies, especially in Mexico and Central America. But then also because it drives down wages in the United States, and you feel that Black Americans are often the first to suffer because of the lower wages. And then finally, it drives up population in the United States, and sometimes dramatically, which has its own set of environmental impacts. Would that be a nice summary?
That is more than a summary. Matter of fact, but it isn't just me. It's the National Academy of Sciences with their book A Common Destiny, or their updated one more recently. It points out that the assumption that no one is hurt by high rates of immigration is not true. It's not only low skilled and less educated Black workers, but Hispanic workers also. Any of the low skilled workers, and it's it's absolutely true. There was another, what was the last point that you said? Because I think that I wanted to bring
Well,
some.
that it drives up population growth in the United States was my, yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We're number one in a couple of the wrong things. We're maybe 4.5% of the population, and we're using 25% of the world's resources, and account for maybe a little bit more than that well, it depends on how you want to count pollution. And look at our deaths, our virus death. Uh, and the same thing, we're 4.5%, and we're a quarter, about, or 20%, between 20%, depending on how much the undercount of our cases by the virus, death by the virus are in the United States, and 25%. And look at what we are doing. We claim that we're being humane by policies which drive peasant farmers off of barely sustainable lands, uh, from our subsidized products, and then force them to have to come, you know, sometimes across other countries, but across deserts, to try to get opportunities in the United States, and or to assume that we, the United States, with our 4% or 5%, can take up the 2 billion. The last time I figured, last time I saw figures or for surveys around the world, it's an estimated 2 billion people would like to migrate to the United States, basically because of economic migrants. And the tragedy is that we should be accepting true refugee migrants who are in danger of their life. We cannot absorb all the economic migrants. And what we should be doing, and that's one of the reasons I have committed, or I'm a retired senior foreign service senior foreign service worker, was the need for us to be really investing. We should be, and the environmental movement should be, as I think they probably are to be holding our congressional people accountable for our spending, our military spending in empire, instead of having some of that money going not just for domestic kinds of things, but for some of the rest of the world that would probably stimulate our exports. If we really were stimulating the development, we would find out that our economy would actually, it'd be like an investment to stimulate our economy, because especially in Central and South America, where I visited and been very familiar with, if we really stimulated growth and fairer opportunities there, they would be buying our products. They've always preferred American products to European products or Asian products. Well, maybe not anymore in cars. I mean, the Toyotas and some of the others, but we would benefit, just as we refuse to acknowledge that if the gap, the income, not just the income gap, but the wealth gap between Black and white Americans we pay a terrible cost. Recent studies have shown that we lose trillions of dollars because of that. Black folks would spend the money. If Black folks had that difference between the $17,000 of wealth and the 177, which is I think the median, or no, it might be average or median, I'm not sure. Man, that this economy would be booming a hell of a lot more, bro.
I want to jump forward just a little bit, because a lot of the listeners to EarthX are younger people, and they don't know some of this history, but they also don't know some of environmental history, I think. In 2004, you ran for the board of the Sierra Club.
Yeah.
And you were an African-American man of high standing at the time. You had a great resume. You were retired. You had some time on your hands, and you wanted to diversify the club, and you wanted to bring in more environmental justice in the Sierra Club. In addition, I read that you opposed, the presidency of George Bush, and you were trying to get a better environmental president. You would think that would be the perfect, formula to get on a board like that and serve the environmental community. And so, in your own words, kind of what happened?
Well, folks have been played. including many, I think, Sierra Club voters. There was a power struggle going on. D. Griffin and Spielberg, DK, the G of that, uh, had, it turned out later, had told David Polk, the Sierra Club head, that if they changed or did not hold his belief of the stand on immigration, he would withhold $100 million, which the club later got because they did a job on Dick Lamb, David Fomentel, and myself. And one of the things that um, the Sierra Club did not want to see me on the board because there were questions. There were questions in the past about the club's responsiveness to environmental justice. The great book of Ballard, their insensitivity toward that, ranging to even questions about the impact of the club from the founder David Muir's values on race that raised questions. These were not things that the club wanted to deal with. Not everybody on the club. On that board, we had Ben Zuckerman and the wonderful guy from
Oh, Watson. Yeah.
Watson. Yes. So there were some voices on that on the club that were open, but the majority and the staff, we had a campaign from the staff against us too, as well as basically and that it was we were insurgents that were appeared to threaten the status quo, and whenever you do that, it was interesting. I testified before Congress that year, and there was Representative Cannon from Utah on the House Judiciary Committee, and I was speaking for reduced immigration, and he said, Dr. Morris, even the Sierra Club. Well, I understand the Sierra Club is being taken over by some Africans, some who are white racists. I said, gee, Representative Cannon, that must mean me, because I must be the only white racist that's ever been nominated for the Sierra Club board by the then deputy director of the National NAACP. And everybody cracked up. That's my best line in Congress. I never got a better than that. So
yeah, I'm sure you wouldn't want to go through that again. And I recently heard Dick Lamb say he wouldn't want to go through that again. Of course, Dick Lamb is former governor here in Colorado, who took strong positions on growth and also on immigration. I wonder though, because the way it played out in the race and also the way it played out in public was as a racist issue. But the way you describe your position on immigration to me sounds very progressive. You want there to be different foreign policies that don't drive immigrants away from their lands.
The push factor, absolutely right. That's not even discussed. No one discusses that, Gary. No one discusses that.
And you worked in foreign service. You want more foreign aid in those places, and you actually support higher refugees.
Absolutely.
And you also are supporting higher wages for people in the United States, especially Black Americans. It sounds like a very progressive thing, but it didn't play out that way, obviously.
Well, because there's a political correctness. One of the things that I see nowadays, and I think we might get this if we talk about my concerns, or I support the Black Lives Matter movement, but I feel they've made some strategic mistakes, and I'll talk about that. But one of the things that I see play out is that folks are vulnerable because they don't know their history, and because they believe there's political correctness. As a former professor, dean, and before that as a student, I have been saddened to see the movement towards safe spaces in American academic institutions. And they've been led by, many of them have been Black people. I mean, look, hell, if we needed safe spaces, we need them the days when I hit, Colgate or Syracuse, where there were a few of any Black students on campus. Uh, but but we we can't be safe if we're not prepared for the world. And why would we insulate ourselves, think that we should be feel safe or comfortable on university campuses when the world wants to kick the hell out of us? You got to get the hell kicked out of you when you step off. It makes no sense to me, and I regret that, and I really I think that that by searching for safe spaces, you don't prepare yourself for uh, the ability to persuade or to recognize what you're going to be coming up against. Because the world out there, especially for Black people, has not been and will not be safe.
And, I actually got my master's degree in education many years ago, and I thought I wanted to be a university administrator, which is, kind of an odd thing to think you want to be. I went ahead and got my doctorate in environmental studies, though, and I've done that pretty much since. But, the university system has changed quite a bit just in the past decade towards the direction, I think. And there's some profound things that have happened to make universities, I guess, more narrow-minded and less safe. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I think that to a certain degree, yes, absolutely, yes. I think also, I see the overstaffing. Even though I was a university administrator, the overstaffing with the administrative function vis-a-vis the faculty. I see the abuse of adjunct faculty. I tried to make sure they were not abused when I was in charge, but the fact that universities acting as if they are corporations and reducing I guess I heard an amen there.
Yeah, yeah.
But acting as if they were corporations and for profit maximization, and so therefore uh, you know having adjunct professors paying them little and having them do most of the work, the teaching work, is a shame.
You recently wrote a piece for the Galveston News about population growth in Texas.
Yes.
And you live there in Dallas. And of course, EarthX is in Dallas too. It is, I think Texas is the fastest growing state in the
That's
United States.
exactly right. They're passing.
Yep. And a lot of people are moving there. They're moving there from other states. In
Yeah.
California, though, the fleeing of California, Texas is a destination. And also, of course, there's you're a border state with Mexico, and so there's a lot of immigration in Texas too. So, what spurred you to write that op-ed about population growth? I mean,
Well, one of the things that I've been constantly trying to fight for is for environmental standards. And it's at risk if we're talking uh, climate and we're talking the Earth at risk, then we can't ignore population movements, especially when you have population moving from uh, a more sustainable place to one like where we are, which is less sustainable for the planet as a whole. And to the, the sad fact is that quality of life is consistently at risk. It's at risk for people who are moving here, and it's at risk for people who are here. In Texas, especially with its non-regulatory policy, everything people are moving into Houston, and they're going to be closer to refinery pollution, all kinds of. In Houston, they would move into areas that are floodplains. That's where there's no. America is the only country in the world that have bought the crap that says that regulation is bad and that an unregulated private sector works in the public interest. Nobody else would believe that in the rest of the world. Profit generating folks that are, it doesn't value the commons working in the public interest. You got to be kidding. But that's never questioned. Also, the efficiency of the private sector. As one who has served in government, government is really much more efficient. But once again, the lies that predominate. For instance, the assumption that that Americans have a highly efficient private sector in health. and government is inefficient. Heck, Medicare has an administrative cost between 1% and 3%. Private sector administrative costs and profit maximization is more than 20% in many cases. Matter of fact, the law had to cut them down to 20% because anything over that they'd have to give back, they'd have to rebate to the people. But it's just these common lies that dominate without question. In Texas, one of the things I pointed out in my article is that it makes no sense to be subsidizing additional oil refineries as Texas is doing for heavy oil that should be left in the ground in Canada. It makes no sense for the state to subsidize these additional kinds of production facilities.
You brought up Black Lives Matter earlier, and of course, certainly, you've kind of lived through the arc of the civil rights movement, and this certainly was a new point in the civil rights movement in the United States, I think, in 2020. And so, I mean, sort of having seen it in the 60s, and now
part of it is I didn't just see it. Believe me, brother.
That's what I apologize. I meant that you lived through it. And then, of course, now living through it again, of course, right there in Dallas. There were a number of marches going on in Dallas. Give us some, thoughts on what you think happened, why it happened, what you think was good about it, and maybe if there were mistakes were made, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Let me start with the mistakes, because I want to say to my younger brothers and sisters who've been active in the movement that one of the things that's so positive is that the issues that you've been raised, and the fact that the most depression time for me is when nothing is happening, when it's the acceptance of the damn status quo, which is very. So I applaud young brothers and sisters, and matter of fact, one of the things that's so pleasing is that the number of white participants, the number of white folks, the 40% who didn't vote for Trump, maybe, but white folks who understand, young white folks who got a consciousness that my generation, my age cohort, certainly often does not have. So, but to the young brothers and sisters, there were certain things that we could tell you, could have told you, that could have made you much more effective in some of the marches that seem to have gotten out. Some of them got out of control in places like Portland and some of that. Where I say got out of control was that the leaders of the marches did not keep control. One of the things that in our day that we understood is that you're going to have civil rights marches. You don't have to have them at night. It does you no good to have it at night, because you run additional kinds of risks. Police can't shoot straight in the daytime, so you don't figure they're going to shoot straight at night. Put it bluntly. But I think that you lost control of the movement. One of the things we also had in our movement was we would have monitors when we march, and we would have monitors that were often young football players, young Black football players who and we teach you, we'd go through all kinds of training. You better say, yes, ma'am, you better make sure you're there to help the older folks, things. And we kept control of our marches. We even had, and this wasn't widely known, one of our ways of keeping control was to align with folks. And in some of the marches I've used, one of the most effective monitors were some of Farrakhan's boys, the Nation of Islam. These little guys, Black guys with their suits and their black bow ties, and everybody in the hood knew that you don't mess with them. That they're going to come, they're going to be nice to you. Because say, sir, you should be standing in line. You can't go out. And the toughest dudes in the hood, okay, because they knew that if you mess with one of them, you're gonna have the whole damn Nation of Islam on your freaking back. And they were playing. So I'm simply saying, these kinds of things we could have suggested to our younger people, but I don't think they thought they had to learn anything from us. And I think that's sort of the tragedy. I mean, I think that there is an assumption that and I've seen that from some of my children, that if you if you don't know something and you don't think you don't have to worry about not knowing it. You don't know what you don't know, and so therefore what you don't know is not important. And I think that that's been one of the things that I you know because no matter what they did, they're going to be criticized. They're going to be criticized by and so most of that criticism is not reasonable. 93% of the marches were and just like the fact that America ignores the fact that the greatest threat to or terrorist threat to Americans have been and are the white supremacist based radical right organizations. No one really wants to talk like that because they're trying to show some kind of parity with Antifa, which is really nothing, which is really minuscule. So it's these kinds of things that I would love to have been able to have young people. We still have young people. I still have something I'm mentoring and so forth. And so, some young people are still wise enough, including couple of my grandsons, are wise enough to listen to the old man and so forth. But I think that's we see some mistakes and keep our mouths shut, but we wish that we could have just simple things they could have learned from us.
As an environmentalist, of course, we all either watched or participated in it, and the environmental community was, in part involved in some of the movements that occurred this year. And I just saw
that did not happen in the '60s. See, that's one thing we need to recognize. That I'm so glad, I recognize that that's one of the more positive things that where you were not with us, and we were not with you, basically in the '60s. We were together. No.
If you had to kind of wrap things up here, our show is called Overcoming Overshoot, and it's about how humans are kind of weighing lace the landscape and have overshot our resource base on many levels. What could you offer as a sense of hope and to kind of end the show here for us?
Let me just simply say that one of the most important things in politics, and I say this as a scholar of politics now, a founder of the National Association of Black Political Scientists. I've spoken before on political science groups before Congress and so forth else. One of the most fundamental things that is important is the agenda. What goes on the agenda? The most positive thing, and I hope that we don't lose it, is that we've got on the agenda now because we probably have to have the climate change. We haven't had population and relationship with immigration yet. The comprehensive answers are not clear. Like I said, one of them is clearly getting money out of politics, and so that people who could run for office really reflect their society and not just the super rich or those who donate to campaigns. But at least we've gotten on the agenda. And if we fail, if we become complacent, if it is on the agenda and nothing happens and we stop actively fighting for it, the real glory of the United States in our history is the struggles that have been long and for many years unsuccessful. And they're unsuccessful when they're dormant. They're unsuccessful when people are not complaining, when people have been beaten down and oppressed so much that they see hopelessness. Well, I see movement among young people and an enlightenment among young people, the younger millennials. Congratulations to you guys. You certainly seem sharper than we old baby boomers, but we had our day. We had our day. We were kicking a little ass too, man. So, but it's really fundamentally important that it continues. That agitate, we fight. Frederick Douglass says that power concedes nothing. And those who expect to concede is like expecting the thunder and the lightning to go away and get rain without thunder and lightning. We've got to hopefully unify, but we don't have to be unified. We've just got to keep the agenda and fighting for the agenda for climate, for racial justice, for social justice, for economic justice, and for sustainability.
All right. Thank you very much, Frank Morris. This has been a wonderful conversation. You know, I could do this every day, and we could, and maybe I'll come sit on the couch there sometime, and we'll
Oh,
have a nice chat and a cup of
always
coffee.
welcome, Gary. We're out outside of Dallas.
Okay. Thank you very much. Again, thank you for watching us. I'm Gary Wockner, and this is Overcoming Overshoot on EarthX TV.